Hello, YouTubers. I want to welcome you to another edition of Bargain Bin Gear. And, well, this is kind of a strange episode. And the reason is, it's not about any real specific gear, you know, in a way. Okay. Now, I hope you've been subscribing to the channel because I often reference old videos, and that'd be an easy way to find them. Okay, now, recently, if you'll recall, we did the project of a abandoned PV enclosure, and it required a PV speaker, right? And basically it's a PA speaker, and we were kind of using it as a bass amp, right, to get a really big bass tone. Now, interestingly, and this is something I discovered, and it may be common sense, I guess it just wasn't to me. Okay, but I discovered a way to make a bass sound huge, right? Now, I emulate bass on guitar using an octave pedal or electro-harmonics, a bass 9, or a sub and up TC Electronics octave pedal, so on and so on. There's a Boss RC5, there's a ton of them. And basically it makes your guitar sound pretty close to a bass. Okay. Now, I do looping with guitar, okay? And what I realized was that the bass emulation sound, first off, sounds puny through a guitar speaker. So you can't really run it through a guitar amp, it sounds puny. I really liked a bass sound that sounded huge, right? And real deep, you know, like kind of, well, I don't know how else to describe it except a big bass sound. So in my loops, if I'm playing guitar and I want a really big bass sound, right? Well, you would think you would just turn up the volume, right? But what I discovered is that, and it didn't really matter whether it was a big bass amp, a little bass amp, a PA, small PA, big PA, you know, sometimes I would get this big bass sound, but other times, not really. I mean, it's there, it's present. But in comparison to the guitar, it's just not as big, right, as I'd want it to be. And I thought, well, that's kind of peculiar, you know, no matter how much I turn it up, in comparison to the guitar, it's always about the same, you know, and it's kind of, as I said, present, but that's about it, you know, and I wanted a really big guitar bass sound, you know, not overwhelming, but really powerful, present sound. Now listen. So here's what I did. Up to this point, I had been using a crossover to split my bass signal and guitar signal from the guitar. Now, you don't have to use a crossover, though, for this to work. Okay, and here's what I discovered. It's kind of seems really simple, but yet it's not. Okay. On the crossover, for the bass signal, you have 0 to basically 100, you know, you can, for the volume level, right? So, of course, I'd crank it up to 100, right? Makes sense. You want a real good signal to go to the bass amp or what have you. And I did the same on the guitar, which was 0 to 100 as well, right? And that's where I got into trouble, in the sense that while the bass was present, you know, it didn't seem very big, you know, especially when you combine the guitar with it. I mean, it's there, but that's about it. Okay, so, well, after a little experimenting, I realized and discovered that the mix, right, between the guitar signal and the bass signal makes all the difference in the world. And that is the solution. Okay, so here's what I did. Basically, on the volume of the bass amp, right, I turn the volume up on the bass on the 0 to 100, to about 75 or whatever you. Right, so pretty loud, really. But then here's what I did. Well, I took the guitar down, and I mean, I'm used to, you know, turning it up to the maximum volume. Instead, I turned it up to about halfway, and oh my goodness, the mix was just perfect. All of a sudden, I could hear the guitar really clearly, and then when the bass comes in, it's really huge, right? And surprisingly, this worked for even my Dean Bassola 40, little 40-watt bass practice amp, right? And I'd always been kind of unhappy with it in the sense that you couldn't get that big bass sound. Well, now all of a sudden you could get that big bass sound, right? It didn't really matter if the bass amp, you know, was 150 watt Harkey or the Dean Bassola or even the PA, right? As long as you kept that mix between the guitar and the bass. Now, if you're not using a crossover, obviously, instead you would use the volume on your guitar and bass amp or PA if you're doing this kind of thing, right? And you would think that, man, I want it to be loud and really huge, you know, that you turn up the guitar up to 100 and the bass up to 100, but that's not the case at all. In fact, you reduce the guitar volume level, right? And that was quite something I wasn't used to at all. And if you do need then to increase the volume, you don't want to lose that mix between the bass and the guitar. And of course you can fine tune it, you know, so that the bass isn't overwhelming the guitar and vice versa. And then if you need it to be louder, just as you would on a mixing board, you turn up the volume on both amps, basically. I don't know, it's kind of hard to describe, and it took me a little while to wrap my head around it. I mean, you'd think it'd be so simple, but it's the opposite of what I thought. You know, I thought, oh, well, to make the bass sound bigger, you know, in my loops and things, well, I've got to turn everything up, right? But that's not the case. It's the opposite, in fact. It's actually turning up the bass a bit and turning down the guitar a bit, right? I mean, it makes logically sense, but in the practical world, I mean, I just had never even considered that, you know, on the little, you know, box there, the little crosswave thing, the little crossover box, you know, which I guess I can kind of use as a mixer in a way, you know, but even without it, you could do that with a guitar and bass, you know, and this is really great because, well, you can make, let's say you're playing in a band, right? And I don't know if you know, my experience has been in a band, everybody's trying to turn up just a little bit more than the other guy, right? Thinking that you're going to get a bigger sound and things. And it's just not the case, surprisingly, right? And by turning down the guitar and increasing the bass just a bit, where you have a good mix, right? Man, it makes all the difference in the world. And in fact, you know, it seems to clear up, you know, clear up the different sounds so you can hear the bass really clearly and the guitar really clearly, right? And in a band, that would be very important. In fact, you know, if everybody's turning up to the maximum or, you know, or very, very loudly, then it seems to get cluttered up, and even the bass and guitar, even though they're different frequencies, they're kind of fighting each other. So I was kind of really pleased because I finally discovered how to get even, you know, huge bass sounds even at low volume levels. Because it seemed that the volume level didn't really affect things all that much. And once you have the mix set between bass and guitar, even at low volumes, you still get that precise mix where the bass sounds huge, and yet the guitar can still be heard and is very clear, right? And if you need more volume, you just turn it up, right? Turn up the amps without losing the balance, right? And I think that's the key, is the mix between the bass and the guitar, right? And I would have always thought that it was the opposite, that, you know, even though you want a big bass sound, right, well, you just turn everything up and you turn the guitar as loud as you can and the bass as loud as you can, right? And that's just not the way to do it, I'm telling you. It makes a big difference. And in fact, I can show you here. At least this works for me. It may not work for others. I don't know. But anyway, let's take a listen to it. Now listen, here's the bass emulation, right, coming out of that PV cabinet that we had just done some videos on. It sounds kind of like this, right? So I mean, that's a pretty big bass emulation sound. But here's what happens though when you loop it, and I have the volumes on the crossover, you know, the low and the guitar maxed out volume-wise, both on 10 if you like. And I don't mean 10 the volume on the amps, okay? But you'll see what happens here, and it's kind of disappointing. And I can tell you ahead of time, basically what happens is, while it sounds big by itself, right, when I run it through with a loop compared to the guitar, it kind of gets smaller sounding. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a loop, a real simple loop, and we'll put the bass line over it and see what happens. Alright, so here I'm just creating the loop. Okay. And now, putting in the bass line. It's okay, but it's not that big bass sound, really. So I mean, it's okay. I just wish it had been a little bit bigger sounding, you know? So now what I'm going to do is take the volume down on the little crossover on the guitar part, surprisingly. So what should happen is you still get the clear guitar part, but now the bass will be much bigger. Let's see if that's true. Let's try it. So first I'll do the guitar loop. So now I add the bass line. So here we go, I'll add the bass line there. Okay. So without doubt, that makes a big difference, right? It doesn't even change the guitar sound much at all as far as volume goes. But it's just that little tiny change, mix-wise, and it makes a huge difference. Just as an example, I'll run up, whatever. And now I'm going to turn the volume on the guitar all the way up, and you'll see obviously the bass sound gets punier and punier. Let's try it. See, the bass gets smaller. I have the volume all the way up. see the mix makes a huge difference in the how big the bass is. We'll do one more example here. Alright, so let's do a brief loop here. Guitar volume all the way up. Add another guitar loop. The bass. So let's add that. Okay, so, I mean, that's not bad. I mean, you definitely hear the bass, you know, and it's okay, but it's not that giant, huge bass sound I'm looking for. So now I'm going to take the crossover volume here on the little crossover and turn down the guitar, surprisingly, which I thought I would never do, but to get the right balance with the bass, it makes all the difference. Let's try it. So now I'm going to do the similar, I can remember what it was, something like that. Well, okay. Something like that. So let's loop that and let's see what happens. Loop that second part. So there you go. It's really hard to try to show you the difference, especially just via camera. But I can tell you, for me, it made a huge difference. Because when I had the guitar on the maximum, well, that little PV bass sound, which sounded fine alone, when it was in the mix, it would get not lost, but it wasn't a really big bass sound as I had wanted, whereas with this method, makes a big difference. And it was actually by turning down the guitar to fit the mix better between the bass and the guitar sound. And when I turned down the guitar volume, right, all of a sudden that bass becomes huge. And because it's not a drastic change in volume, the guitar doesn't suffer much. And I mean, I'm using a crossover. You don't have to use a crossover. You could do this with just a, bass amp and a guitar amp. So if you're in a band or what have you, So sometimes, less is more. And you would never think that. And, if I was in a band and someone said, hey, why don't you turn down the guitar a little bit? I'd be like, what? What do you mean? Right? But in fact, it may result in a better sound. Especially when the bass is full, full sound, and complements the guitar really well, Whereas I found when the volume is way up on maximum like that, the bass is there, but it kind of gets jumbled up a little bit, if that makes sense. It's not quite as clear, So anyway, this is really something to consider and something you may want to experiment. And in fact, you could do this in a live band situation, looping such as I am, or just even in your recordings. Okay, so there you go. Now here's something that's funny, is that, I thought, man, to get that really big bass sound, I just need bigger bass amps, right? More powerful bass amps. And that's because I was ignoring the mix, and in fact, that is not the case. And what's really great is like my little 40-watt Dean Bassola practice amp, right? Which in the past would get completely lost and couldn't produce that really big bass sound, I thought, right? But using this technique where you turn down the guitar a bit and get a good balance between the bass and guitar, all of a sudden, even the Dean Bassola could produce really nice bass sound, and without affecting the guitar too much. You don't want to lose your guitar signal. And I know the first tendency for me was always, well, turn it up, right? As much as you can. And I've discovered that in doing that, that I was kind of losing getting a big bass sound and a really nice clear guitar sound, Alright. So there you go. So I suppose this uses a lot of different gear. But it's something to think about and experiment with, really. If you've been turning everything up like I have been, really, you might want to give this a try. Because I found very much when you start thinking of it in recording terms, for example, right? And when you're recording, you want a really good mix between the bass and guitar. And that doesn't mean, taking the faders, of a recording console and pushing them all up to maximum, right? You will move them to get the right balance. And this is the same concept, but in a live setting. So there you go. Let me know if you give this a try and what you think, if it helps at all. Man, it did wonders for me. Now I can confidently switch over to my bass sound and know that it's going to be this really big, solid bass sound instead of getting lost, in the guitars and things. All right, very good. See you next time. Okay, bye.